quite a bit different than anything I've done so far, but it is something that I've been thinking about doing quite a bit. And I have these interesting perspectives, interesting takes on things that I'm a bartender, and I've now been proven for a couple of years that this assertion is correct. And I think that people might actually not just appreciate what I've got to say, but maybe even resonate with some of it. So it's not all going to revolve around things like this, but I am doing something like this first. Not because I want it to be first, but because I'm actually getting my happy ass up and starting it on this. This is the kind of stuff that I will find myself watching. A lot of history stuff, a lot of personal takes on sociology, psychology, politics, stuff like that. And a lot of these videos, I feel like I've always got something that if I was sitting with someone watching it, that I'd want to be telling them that I think that they'd benefit from. So, I mean, that is how someone decides they want to go and do this reaction stuff, right? So, all right, I've watched about 4 minutes of this. So I don't really know how it's going to go. I do know, however, that I don't necessarily stand with the first one, even though it's not that I disagree with it. But then the second one makes a really good point, and I was like, you know what, this needs to be when you start doing this thing. So this is about what if society treated women exactly like it treats men. Now, like I said a little bit earlier, I want, or was that in the previous take that I was trying to do and nothing was working quite properly? I don't know, but I want, when a woman says she wants equality, I want her to have it. But I want her to understand what that is. I want her to understand what equality really means so that we're not just flipping the script for a while until we have to do all of this again. Okay? We live in a society now where us men are a lot more open to being wrong. Okay? I admit for thousands of years, there's no. When we were always right, you're going to deal with this. And to a large degree, there's a systemic situation going on there, but that has no effect on what we need to do. Okay, just because it is systemic doesn't mean we need to keep the systemic part of it. Just change the focus. No, that's not what we need to go for. But so far, I thought this video was fairly decent. And
this is Mr. Eugene, and today we're conducting a thought experiment. One that I think has the potential to create more genuine understanding about the male experience than any serious, straightforward explanation of male disadvantage ever could. Because I've learned something over the years of having these conversations.
He's right on this.
When you explain male suffering directly, people either dismiss it, minimize it, or simply don't have the emotional framework to absorb it. The data doesn't land, the statistics.
And minimizing it is a lot easier for people to continually do to you because they don't actually see it as them disregarding your feelings. It's just well, for whatever reason we just can't do anything about it. It's just how it is. Yeah, it kind of sucks, but talking about it's not going to help. That kind of crap.
Statistics don't move people. The lived experience descriptions get labeled as complaining. So today we're going to try a different approach. We're going to flip everything. We're going to take every disadvantage, every double standard, every area where men are systematically treated as disposable or irrelevant or unworthy of concern, and we're going to ask a simple question. What would happen if this were happening to women instead? Not as an attack on women, not as some exercise in bitterness or point scoring, but as a genuine mirror, because sometimes the only way to make invisible suffering visible is to ask people to imagine it happening to someone they care about. And our society, whatever its many virtues, has made it abundantly clear that it cares about women's suffering in ways it simply does not care about men's suffering. So let's hold up that mirror and see what reflects back.
Remember, equality is a lot more than just physical. Equality is that suffering. Is you may not be able to stop the suffering, but acknowledging that it's going on would do great things for this world. Great things for the male psyche. Just giving credit somewhere where it's due, because this sweeping everything under the rug thing, I mean, there's a reason why men off themselves a lot higher rate than women. There's an absolute reason for that.
Before we get into this, let me be clear about the tone. This is not rage. This is not a war cry against women. This is a calm, clear-eyed examination of double.
I love women and I want one to want to stay with me. Because there's some realities of relationships that this era isn't willing to work through. You know, I'm not a perfect person, but what I am, is someone who's willing to not just work on something, but willing to admit when he's wrong, willing to grow in places that he needs to. Something that I've been forced to do, something that I've wanted to do, and something that I've absolutely acquiesced to. But it's something that I would never change. It is something that I would only work more on. And that's something that is sorely lacking in society, male and female.
Standards that are so normalized we've stopped seeing them as double standards at all. Men experience these things daily. They're so woven into the fabric of male existence that most men don't even recognize them as injustices anymore. They just accept them as the price of being a man. This thought experiment is designed to make that price visible, to make the invisible visible, and to raise a question that I think deserves a serious answer. If we wouldn't accept these things happening to women, why do we accept them happening to men? Stay with me. The draft and disposability.
Now, my issue is, why are you going to open up with this? You know, maybe as a cap to something, maybe as a pointed tactic to talk about maybe something else, you know, like the whole my body, my choice thing, but not at the beginning of this video. But I'm going to let it play out. It's absolutely this huge, huge difference. But I think that this belongs more in an argument about bodily autonomy. I do not believe that we should be able to tell women what they need to do with their bodies, but I do believe that we should at least be expecting them to have some understanding of biological consequences, especially when every rare once in a while, and I hope it's every rare once in a while, a woman who does not plan on being with a man wants that extremely passionate moment and tells him to release inside his woman, knowing full well that she has plans in mind to get the situation expunged. He also knows what the consequence is, but he's not thinking about that baby going away. He's thinking about a life. He's thinking about raising a child. He's thinking about his wife. And she has no plans. You know, these are things that happen. These are things that I'm very, very well aware of, that she goes and she aborts that child, destroying you when you thought that this was everything. But all right, so we're going to get back into this, because this is about, here we are, you know, the draft. It is a massive systemic difference in how we treat the classes. But it's one that makes sense to me, because, I mean, we got testosterone. You know, it's designed for that kind of crap. I mean, it is what it is. Run it. I'll go.
Let's start with the most fundamental expression of male disposability in our society, the draft. Every young man in this country, when he turns 18, is legally required to register for selective service. Required by law, under penalty of losing access to federal student loans, federal employment, and potentially facing criminal charges. This registration exists for one purpose, so that if the government decides it needs bodies to send into combat, it knows where to find them. Women are not required to register. This wasn't an oversight. It was a deliberate legal distinction based on a principle so deeply embedded in our culture that we...
Now, I think all of these graphics and such are AI, and I don't know if the voice is, but I'm going to say it right now. This is my stance on AI. It's very, very short. There's a finite amount of work that you can put into an AI tool that makes it okay. If you're just putting in one sentence and printing what comes out, yeah, you're freaking stupid. But if you really work these tools to something, it's worth it.
Barely notice it anymore. In a crisis, men's lives are available to be spent. Women's lives are not. Now hold that thought and imagine the reverse. Imagine that women were legally required to register for selective service at 18. That failure to do so resulted in loss of federal benefits and potential prosecution. That in times of war, women would be directed to combat roles as needed without option to decline. Think about that for 30 seconds. Really think about it. The organized opposition to this would be unlike anything we've seen in modern political history. There would be legal challenges reaching the Supreme Court within weeks. There would be marches of a scale and intensity that would make previous demonstrations look modest. There would be emergency legislative sessions. Every major media outlet would be treating this as the defining civil rights issue of the generation, and they would be right to respond that way. Because it is a profound thing to say to any human being, your life is available to be claimed by the state in times of need. Your body can be directed into situations where you may be killed. You don't get a vote in this, you just have to be available. That is precisely what we say to 18-year-old boys. And we say it so casually, so routinely, that the young men receiving this message barely register it as the extraordinary thing it actually is. Welcome to adulthood. Sign here to confirm that your life belongs to us if we decide we need it. If we wouldn't say this to women, we need to ask our...
AI because there's 3 hands on the middle guy. So, okay, this is all absolutely AI-generated stuff. But like I said, I don't really care because there's a finite amount of work. If this ends up being... Because, like, I've got this idea of how this video goes in my head, and that's why I'm streaming it, and not, and this is going to go good or it's going to go bad. Reaction videos should be reactions, right? Not, ooh, I can say some interesting things for this. It should be reactions.
Ourselves why we say it to men without a second thought. Are dying at work. Approximately 5,000 men die in workplace accidents in this country every single year.
Yeah, and that segue into the next section. Yeah, so the voice might also be AI.
5,000. That's not a statistic. That's 5,000 families who lose a father, a brother, a husband, a son. 5,000 funerals. 5,000 lives ended because the work they were doing killed them. These deaths are concentrated in specific industries: construction, mining, logging, fishing, agriculture, transportation, jobs that are physically dangerous, jobs that happen to be overwhelmingly male, jobs where the profit calculation apparently favors accepting a certain level of work or death over the cost of making conditions safer. Now imagine those 5,000 deaths were female deaths. Imagine 5,000 women dying on the job every year in industries dominated by women.
That's where it starts to... It made me decide I was probably going to try and react to this video, that it might actually end up making some good points. Because it's that, the way it was put, if 5,000 men in male-dominated industries die a year, that's how it is. We need all these luxuries in our life, all of the fuel, all of the machinery, all of that stuff. But if all of a sudden we realize that there was 5,000 women dying in women-dominated industries, there would be a massive, massive uproar. There would be changes to the working code, everything else. We would have OSHA show up and change literally everything. It would have a massive result.
Imagine what that would look like on the news. What congressional hearings would be called, what regulatory investigations would be launched, what OSHA overhauls would be mandated, what documentaries would be produced, what advocacy organizations would spring up overnight to demand accountability. We know exactly what would happen because we've seen how society responds when female safety is perceived to be at risk. The response is immediate, comprehensive, and treated as a moral emergency. When men die on the job, companies pay out settlements, file the required paperwork, and the world moves on. It's simply the cost of doing certain kinds of work. And the men who do that work, who accept physical risk as part of their daily reality because someone has to and because it pays what it pays, these men are not treated as people making extraordinary sacrifices.
Not only are we just kind of doing it, we all, well, I won't say all, but there's a large portion of us men who directly understand that that's something we trade, that we trade our safety for good money. We actively understand this. We just don't understand that that's not actually societally acceptable. That if you continue to be like that, if you continue to accept that like that, it's only going to get worse. Okay, the reason why we had people getting locked in their workplaces and then, places accidentally burnt down and crap is because we were accepting what was going on. And now, even though we had that situation where all of these workforce rules ended up in place to protect us, we're now in a place where, we've still anesthetized ourselves to some of the more gross negligences. I don't think that's a word, but to the normal business operating practices, the SOPs for these businesses, that we have exploited the perspective that we're allowed. The males are allowed to be put into dangerous work situations, and as long as it doesn't get too horribly bad, we don't actually have to fix any of this stuff. And if it does get too horribly bad, we don't really have to fix much of this stuff, and we just got to throw some money, and then it's all good. This is a real point here, that if it was about women, that if it was a female-dominated field that was having that many deaths a year, which, mind you, to put that in perspective, okay, 5,000 deaths a year may not sound like a lot, but let's be 100% real. Now, I'm completely, estimating this because I'm not that great with math, but that's about 15 a day. It's a little bit less, so we'll just say that's like 12 men a day die at work every day. So that's like one for every daylight hour. There's a man dying. That's insane. That's absolutely insane. Now, if that was female, it would absolutely be doing something.
They're treated as a line item, 5,000 funerals a year, and it barely makes the conversation. Living shorter lives, men die approximately 5 to 6 years before women on average. 5 to 6 years of life that women have, and men don't. That gap represents an enormous amount of living, grandchildren growing up, years of retirement, experiences, relationships, time. The reasons for this gap are complex and involve multiple factors. Men take more physical risks. Men work more dangerous jobs.
Now, something about life expectancy, though. Okay, so when they're talking about this, when they say that men live 5 or 6 years less than women, they're not talking about, on average, men. Let's say that your average death for women is 70 or 76. Let's just say 76. Okay, it's not saying that your average man dies at 70. It means that the average man, how do I put this? So there's a lot of men dying extremely young, and there's a chunk of men dying extremely old, and that makes the average to the 70. You're not going to have as many women dying at 18 as you do men. You can have a lot more women dying at 89 than you do men at 89, because they've already had so many opportunities to fall off that ladder, to get killed in war, to get a really bad injury at work and then die at the hospital, just to use those three things right there that, helping me talk here. The odds of you going out before you're 30 as a man is astronomically higher than if you're a woman.
Men are less likely to seek medical care. Men are more likely to die by suicide. All of these feed into a mortality gap that has persisted for generations. Now ask yourself, if women were dying 5 to 6 years earlier than men, would we be having calm academic discussions about the complex contributing factors?
I think that the factors for why men are dying that younger so much more prevalently is more of a society, or it's past a societal thing. It's a species type thing. It's just we tend to be more into everything. The testosterone makes us want to do that. I don't really think that this is necessarily one of those points, because it's like the idea of it being reversed is like, no, kind of like the draft. No. I mean, a woman is to bring life into this world, not take it out. That's our job, okay? And I think most men would completely agree with that.
Or would we be treating it as a public health emergency demanding immediate attention and substantial resources? The answer is obvious. We know the answer because we've seen how society responds to female health disparities. Research funding follows, public campaigns follow, policy follows. The machinery of social concern mobilizes with speed and scale. For men dying years earlier, the response is essentially, well, men make certain choices. Men take certain risks. There are reasons for this. The implicit message being the gap is explainable, which apparently makes it acceptable. A gap being explainable and a gap being acceptable are two completely different things. We've never required female health disparities to be unexplainable before treating them as worthy of serious attention and resources. We
Fibromyalgia.
Shouldn't require that of male health disparities either. The legal system here's one that should generate significant discomfort for anyone who takes equality seriously. Research consistently shows that men receive sentences approximately 60% longer than women for.
I don't like how this segues into the new sections. He should have taken some time to get a little bit of a breakaway into it, because it's like, is this another point on the previous, or are you going into the next?
Committing equivalent crimes, not slightly different, not marginally different, 60% for the same offense. Imagine for a moment that the disparity ran the other direction, that women were receiving sentences 60% longer than men for identical crimes. There would be no need to imagine the response. We've seen how our legal system responds when female defendants are perceived to face systemic bias. The response is immediate, vigorous, and treated as a fundamental justice issue. But when the disparity runs the other direction, when men are the ones receiving dramatically harsher sentences for the same behavior, the research exists, the data is published, and the policy response is.
So I think that the initial thought when this comparison is being brought up is like violent crimes. And that's fine. I don't really care. You know, give me a harsher crime than a woman who does the same thing, or harsher punishment for a crime than a woman who does the same thing. As long as it's a violent thing, because, you know, us men, we are a lot more capable of it. And I do understand how being the underpowered gender, or rather, because it doesn't have to be gender, being the underdog can make people snap. And dealing with someone who is snapping versus somebody who is just an aggressive, evil, mean person, that is two completely different things. And a woman is more likely to have snapped than just be a aggressive, mean thing. So yeah, that's fine. But PDF files, that's got a very big difference in how they're treated. Okay, God, I forget her name, but she was down in Florida, and she ended up essaying this middle school boy. And I worked at an Olive Garden, and like she'd go in there to eat, and like she was almost a celebrity. I mean, yeah, she was a pariah, but my God, the things that would be said to her were just normal. You know, people were just, oh, it's her, huh? Isn't that interesting? If there is some male teacher who had gotten accused of that, let's just say accused, because she got convicted. So let's just say a guy was accused. Oh, he won't show his face in public. Oh no. And when it comes time for the punishment, there will be no he got out, he only did a few years. No. That guy's going for a good 20. He's going to get the max, which I do agree. Give him the max. He fucking deserves it. Any PDF file deserves a lot more than the max punishment. But that's a conversation for a different time. But we're watching these women get completely different charges for this. I mean, we're watching female dealers not get as much of a charge as male dealers. Now, is this a big nationwide gap here that I'm mentioning? No, because nobody really gives a crap, and honestly, I don't either. Drug dealers, I don't really give a crap. It's all going to fall away as people. The only reason drugs exist the way that they do is because people are so fundamentally depressed. You know, the best that you can hope for is a smattering of the things that you wanted in life. Yeah, you're going to do drugs. Once that stops, you know, once we start realizing that we have agency in our life, we're going to be able to, you know, work drug dealers out of the equation. But when it comes to especially PDF files, women get a lot less of a charge than anyone else. Look at Ghislaine Maxwell. I mean, if she's even still in prison, but that's a different conversation. Because yeah, there's that. I may get into the Epstein stuff because some of that is just it's absolutely insane. You know, the fact that he affected Activision and microtransactions and everything else, almost creating all of that. That's insane. That's absolutely insane. But all right, back to the video. We're talking about differencing in punishments between male and female. And in a very, very AI driven video, which I'm not all that happy with at the moment, I really wish that, because like I said, there's a certain amount of work, there's a finite amount of work that you can put in to an AI program to make it to where it's worthwhile and it's not just AI slop. This might just be AI slop because there's no transitions. The points are kind of a little bit derivative. I think that there's a couple of better ones that can be made. I think that in relationships, I hope that they get to that, because that's where the biggest, I think, controversy exists between the how we treat men versus how we treat women.
Essentially silence. And then there's family court, where men who have dedicated decades to building a family, who have been present fathers and faithful providers, who have done everything society asked of them as husbands and fathers, walk into a courtroom and discover that the default assumption is that the children belong primarily with their mother, where the burden falls on the father to prove why he deserves equal time with children he helped create and has been raising for years.
Now this has been a massive, massive disconnect between reality and follow through. It's not what I was looking for, but it works. So I will point out, though, it will not stay like this. It already isn't anymore. So we have had a few states, Kentucky or Tennessee and Florida and a couple others, that have had a, by default, 50-50 for a great many years. And we have data now that it's not just new. We've got a good 20, 25, maybe even 30 years of data on these states that have been treating custody as a 50-50 thing. Divorce is a 50-50 thing. And the divorce rate has dropped 30% and stayed down 30%. That's huge. But we've stopped incentivizing women to leave men to, oh, well, not only could I get half this guy's money, his worth, I could get another man in here, and then it's like I've got two men. I've got the income from two men. And then they're like, oh my God, I could get another man, and I could have the income from three men. And then they just live at large. So, I mean, once we stop incentivizing certain things, it's funny how it changes. And as we add data to this reality, it's going to continue to go that direction. And, it's not only going to stop women from leaving men, it's going to stop women from getting with men that they don't plan on staying with men.
If women walked into family court and discovered that the default assumption was that fathers got primary custody 80% of the time, that mothers were given weekend visitation and expected to be grateful for it, that a decade of marriage and motherhood could end with a settlement requiring them to pay financial support to an ex-husband who'd already moved on with someone new, there would be
financial support wouldn't happen. I do believe that the argument is there to say that men should have the children. Not biologically, because that testosterone I was referring to earlier does not help for raising children, even if it can. Even if a man can be very devoted to his children, very, very good at raising them. I mean, I really wanted to sound more eloquent there, but it didn't happen. They can do all this stuff, just like women can do all these things that men do. The odds of having one that does isn't really going to be there. It's not often enough. But if we're talking purely from a standpoint of, well, how does a man get custody anyways? Well, he gets it because the woman is unfit to take care of the children. And in one of those definitions of unfit can be how much money do they make? Well, we take care of that situation by just taking the money from the man and be like, okay, now the woman can take care of this. But that doesn't really work. We're having this society now where women have a bunch of ex-husbands and a bunch of alimony. This isn't sustainable. Okay, so the only sustainable response to that is, okay, ma'am, you don't make enough a year. He does. He gets the kids. That's really how that should go pragmatically. But like I said, biologically, women are absolute caregivers. That's just how it is. Estrogen's great for that.
No court system intact by morning. The response would be immediate, organized, and absolutely uncompromising. And that response would be entirely justified because what I just described is unjust, deeply, fundamentally unjust. It's also exactly what happens to men every day in courtrooms across this country, with very little organized opposition, because men have been conditioned to accept injustice stoically rather than name it and fight it.
Stoically, yes.
Education women now attend and graduate from college at rates approximately 20 percentage points higher than men. For every 100 women pursuing a degree, roughly 80% men are doing the same. And the gap is widening, not narrowing.
That I wasn't aware of.
When the educational gap ran the other direction decades ago, when women...
I mean, and I'm not willing to just believe it because this AI put together thing said it. But, I mean, I wouldn't be all that surprised because, I mean, a lot of us men have been disenfranchised from the whole system because, you know, the same thing that women are figuring out, we've been figuring out for 40 years. These degrees don't mean shit. You know, we can sit here and spend all this money to this school knowing that we're going to have plenty of money to pay it back and then not find that plenty of money to pay it back because the job market isn't there for it. We found that we've been figuring that out for quite a long time. In fact, I think society is moving away from the normal school institution where we expect people to have degrees to ever consider their opinion valid. I think we're moving away from that. And I think that just like with a lot of other changing paradigms, you're going to have people getting on the bandwagon late, and usually it's going to be a demographic. It's going to be a previously less accessible group of people now finding more room in these places because other people are leaving them. And I think that that's what that is. That the system, the expectance of degrees is falling apart, and men who are much more in tune with the system, whether it be actively or just compulsively, are not finding themselves in classrooms as much anymore because those don't pay the bills. Sadly, they should. My generation was brought up thinking that they would, and we've been absolutely proven that they don't. So I don't know if this is a substantiated claim that there are 20% more females in college getting degrees, but I could see it.
Were underrepresented in higher education, the response was exactly what you'd expect. Title IX, scholarship programs specifically for women, targeted recruiting, institutional changes designed to level a playing field that was perceived as tilted against female students. The system mobilized to correct an inequity that was holding women back. Now the gap has reversed and become larger in the other direction. Boys are falling behind in primary and secondary school. They're less likely to graduate high school, less likely to attend college, more likely to drop out if they do attend. And the educational outcomes gap between men and women continues to widen every year. The policy response to this has been essentially nothing, because the narrative of male disadvantage in education doesn't fit comfortably into the frameworks that currently govern educational policy discussions. And so boys continue to fall further behind year after year, while the mechanisms that mobilize so effectively to help girls thrive in education remain largely dormant when it comes to helping boys. This is not a trivial concern.
Really, but yeah.
Education shapes life outcomes in fundamental ways. A generation of men who are significantly less educated than their female peers is a generation facing narrowed opportunities, reduced earning potential, and diminished ability to contribute to families and communities. The downstream consequences of this gap are already visible and will become more pronounced over time. Men dying by their own hands, men die by suicide at approximately 4 times the rate of women. Not slightly more, not somewhat more. 4 times.
That is a massive one. And that's something that thankfully is becoming a little bit more understood. but there's not really much that's being done about it. Um, a lot of it's because of this modern dating market. The modern female, the 304s, as you will. But it's a real issue. And a lot of it's because when we do open up, we don't hear anything but the minimalizing at best. So, I mean, that's a real point. And if women were having a suicide epidemic like that, then I would understand the man or the bear. Then I would understand why you were choosing the bear. But you're not. And we keep choosing the snake. We keep choosing the frickin' snake. And it's not because we're choosing an animal over a woman. It's because you're a frickin' snake. I love women, but there is a do better syndrome that is making every single good woman ruin all of her opportunities, and by way, the men that would have made them the happiest.
This is one of the most devastating statistics in all of public health. It represents an incalculable amount of suffering, an enormous number of families losing fathers and sons and brothers, a crisis of despair playing out at scale and largely in silence.
And every single one of those that lose their father, their brother, their uncle, have no idea why. Every single one of them wishes that they could have done better. Is there something I could I have seen their suffering? And every single one of them blames themselves. It's called a white ghost. And there's a song about it.
Now imagine those numbers in reverse. Imagine women dying by suicide at 4 times the rate of men. Think about what the public health response would look like. Think about the research funding that would be mobilized, the public awareness campaigns, the policy changes, the crisis hotlines, the community programs, the institutional responses at every level of government and civil society. Think about how it would dominate the cultural conversation. For men, the response has been modest relative to the scale of the crisis. Not non-existent, but modest. Because male suicide, like so much else in the male experience, is treated as a men's issue rather than a human issue. And men's issues, as this thought experiment is designed to illuminate, don't receive the same urgency and resources as equivalent issues affecting women. Add to this that men make up over 70% of the homeless population. More than 7 out of 10 people sleeping on the streets, in shelters, under bridges, are men. Men who lost their homes, their families, their financial stability, their footing in society, and they're largely invisible as a crisis because the narrative of who deserves our compassion and concern has been so thoroughly shaped by frameworks that position men as the powerful party who need no help. If 70% of homeless people were women, we would treat it as one of the defining social failures of our time. We do treat female homelessness as a crisis requiring immediate and comprehensive response. Male homelessness at 4 times the rate? It's background noise. Violence against men. Men constitute approximately 75 to 80% of homicide victims in this country. The overwhelming majority of people being murdered are men. Men dying violently at the hands of other people, in numbers that absolutely dwarf comparable statistics for women. Yet the cultural conversation about violence is almost entirely framed around violence against women, which is a real problem deserving serious attention. But so is the reality that men are being killed at rates that make the female homicide rate look, by comparison, dramatically lower. When a woman is murdered,
Yeah,
it
but
is
this one's
news.
also
The
biological.
community mobilizes. Investigators work the
Women
case
aren't
with
likely to
intensity.
kill
The
themselves.
story gets
They're
covered,
also more
and that is
likely
as it
to
should
be
be. Every murder victim deserves that
non-confrontational.
response.
And yes, I'm talking
When a man is
over this
murdered,
because I don't really
when
want to
some
pause it.
ordinary man going about his ordinary
It's-
life
it-
becomes a
this-
victim of violent
There's not
crime,
a lot of good points
the
in
response
this
is
one.
far more muted.
There's
A note
there's
in the police
definitely-
report. Perhaps a brief
I'm just going to pause it because I wish that there was some good way to figure out. So I'm probably not going to watch the rest of this because it is kind of slop, kind of AI slop. That lady's got 3 freaking legs. I mean, you could argue, oh, she's moving them rapidly. Yeah, but well, no, I'm not. No, this just. I don't want to necessarily have men treated differently than women. I mean, than they are now. Okay, in certain aspects, like the divorce, I don't want to by default give women everything. I mean, I want there to be maybe some more understanding on what the situation is actually like. Before we go and we decide that we're going to ruin this guy's life, let's go ahead and make sure that what you're saying about him is true. We have the technology, so let's do it. There's a happy medium for literally everything. The big point that I want for this disparity for how women are treated versus men is for things like the abortion, the bodily autonomy, to be understood a little bit better. I want the bodily autonomy to be understood as what it exactly is. I, as a man, do not have a choice if I have to go to war. And in that war, I don't have a choice on if I have to go up that hill or not. And I don't have a choice if a bullet rips through me. But what it boils down to is a woman has a choice to get pregnant. That's what it boils down to. And in this world where there's so much protection out there, in any form you want to use it, doubling up too. You could be on birth control and use a condom. Does it not feel as good? No, it doesn't, apparently. And I mean, well, I don't like it as much either. But I don't like having a baby scraped out of my woman. And I can't imagine a woman wanting it's. So in lieu of watching the rest of this slop, I'm going to end up ending this. But I am going to pick videos from people that I like a little bit more and end up doing those. Because there's definitely some things. I had just seen one of them. There's lefties losing it. There's a lot of these political things that I'd like to get onto and react to, because even if I agree with some of the things, I really got some things to say about a lot of them. But Levi Nix is pretty awesome. I kind of wish that I could be something like him. He's pretty awesome. But I don't really know where to go and get all of my things. But he does clip it from other videos, and I think I'm probably going to be doing some of that kind of stuff. Clipping other people's videos and then doing that. But right now, we're going to stop with the AI slop that I found. And of course, the first time that I try and do something like this, it's going to be absolute crap. But whatever. It is what it is, and it's got to start somewhere. But all right, guys. I'll end up changing the name on this and everything else later. I got to go run some errands and such. I was just trying to actually make myself do something that I've been thinking about doing. And of course, I ended up making myself do it on something that wasn't worth it. But all right, guys, take care. And remember, there's a happy